goodness alive. Thank you so much. Can't tell you how glad I am to be back here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I spent 15 wonderful years in this beautiful state. Uncle Sam sent me up here during World War II, and I liked it so good, even though I was only here about 8 months at that point. I came back and we lived all of those years. First money I ever made really was in Florence, South Carolina. So, and I got a beautiful redhead now. She was from Mississippi, where I'm from, but we married in South Carolina. So I have some fond memories of this great state. Always good to get back. I wish y'all hadn't let so many people in the restaurants here last night, because, you know, I mean, you had to wait a little bit, but that was good. Now, I thought about this. I was going to start today with my favorite joke. It's one that really people get really excited about. It's so good, as a matter of fact, it'll just knock your hair out. And that's the reason I'm not telling it, because I noticed that a bunch of the guys have already heard it. So, but it is good to have you. We are going to have some fun today, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm going to tell you we're going to have more than fun. I'm going to be talking to you about how do you get more of the things that money will buy. Now, money is not the most important thing in life, but it's reasonably close to oxygen. I mean, you know, when you need it, you really do need it. And I got to tell you, I like what money buys. I like to wear nice clothes and drive a nice car and live in a nice house and take that beautiful red-headed wife of mine on, to nice restaurants and all. Incidentally, when I talk about my wife, I always call her the redhead. She's a decided redhead. I mean, one day she just decided she is going to be a redhead. And she even made a deal with a hairdresser. She said, look, you keep me in the red and I'll keep you in the black. And so far it's worked out real good. Incidentally, when I talk about her, I call her the redhead. When I'm talking to her, it's sugar baby. And we have celebrated 59 honeymoons together. Yeah. And I got to tell you, we're having more fun than ever. We're more in love than ever. We talk more than ever. We do more things together. I mean, the whole 9 yards. So for you kids that's only been married 30 or 40 years, I got some good news for you. It gets better and better and better and better. But the question I want to ask of you, all of you, is how do you see yourself? What is the picture you have of yourself? Do you see yourself as a thriver or just a survivor? And the reason I ask that question is very simple. The picture you have of yourself plays a major role in how you perform. Dr. Joyce Brothers, a number of years ago, said the way you see yourself is the most important thing that you can imagine. It enables you to consistently perform, and she says you cannot consistently perform in a manner which is inconsistent with the way you see yourself. She went ahead to say that it affects the profession you choose, the person you marry, your moral conduct, and your performance in every area of life. Now, I want to start then by working on the picture you have of yourself. I want to ask you 5 different questions. Question number 1 is really just a marketing question. How many of you have ever heard me before, or else this is going to be your first time? Can I see your hands? Okay. Now, that should thoroughly confuse you, but now the second question is kind of tricky, so stay with me. How many of you honestly and sincerely believe, as a matter of fact, you're totally convinced, there's no doubt about it in your mind, that there's something you can specifically do in just 3 weeks that would make your personal life, your family life, and your business life worse? Can I see your hand, please? All right. Then how many of you believe there's something you can specifically do to make them better? Can I see your hands, please? All right. How many of you believe that you as an individual have the choice of choosing to make it better or worse? How many of you believe that? All right. How many of you believe that every choice has an end result? Can I see your hands? You're there. Now let me tell you what you just agreed to without saying a word. In so many ways you just said, look, I don't care how tough my life is right now. I'm not even concerned about how difficult it's been in the past, because I know there's something I can do right now to make it either better or worse. And since the choice is mine, I now choose and commit myself to making it better. Now, for it to get better, you got to have the right picture, because until you change the picture, the performance will remain the same, all right? Several years ago, it must have been at least 20 or 30 years ago, I read where every third person was either remarkably handsome and unusually bright, or incredibly beautiful and absolutely brilliant. Every third person. Now, what I'd like to get you to do, and please, everyone do this, I want you right now to turn to the person closest to you on your left. Turn to your left now and look that person over real good. Now turn to your right and look that person over real good. Now, I'm absolutely convinced that every single person here agrees with me now that obviously it ain't that one. That means it's got to be you. And every day for the rest of your life, I want you to think of yourself as that third person, okay? As a matter of fact, right now, please turn to the person closest to you and say, I am that third person. Now, hopefully they won't agree with you, so you better say it again. I said, I am that third person. Now, incredibly enough, in beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, I sensed the presence of 3 negative people who wonder if they really are that third person. Well, let me put your mind at ease. Number 1, if you're somebody, to anybody, you're somebody. Number 2, consider this. If man can take moldy bread and make life-changing penicillin out of it, just think what a loving God can make out of you. You were designed for accomplishment. I love what St. Augustine said in 399 A.D., and I paraphrase him. Man travels hundreds of miles to gaze at the broad expanse of the ocean. He looks in awe at the heavens above. He stares in wonderment at the fields and the mountains and the rivers and the streams. And then he passes himself by, God's most amazing creation. I got some good news for you, folks. I don't care what your school has taught you or what life has taught you, you did not come from the slime. The theory of evolution is just that, a theory. It is not scientific facts. When you think about it just for a moment, ladies and gentlemen, you look at yourself and you look at other people. Did you know that your heart, for example, according to the research, in an adult lifetime will beat over 2 billion times? Do you really think that could have come out of the slime? You see, our God tells us that you were wonderfully and fearfully made, created in His own image. When you see yourself as a child of the King instead of an emergence from the slime, you think differently of yourself. So we want to look at some things that I believe will help you realize just how significant what you are to yourself, to your family, to your community, and everything else. Now, motivation is critically important. This just happens to be the Get Motivated seminar. And I've had the privilege of appearing for 17 years on every one of the Peter Lowe seminars with 6 exceptions. 3 of them I had a schedule conflict. 3 of them I was unable to attend because I had my 3rd attack of diverticulitis. I lost 6 pints of blood. I had a close call. And though I missed those 3 there, as a matter of fact, they had to take out 75% of my colon. Today, my friends call me semicolon. So, but I sure am glad to be here. Of course, as I tell folks, to get my age, I'm glad to be anywhere. One of my granddaughters thinks I'm so old. I remember when the Dead Sea was just sick. But I'm still buying green bananas. I just want you to know, I think I've got a career in front of me, not just behind me. But now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share with you how you can grow. Georgetown Medical School and their university there did some research, and here's what they found. They found that if your vocabulary goes up, in 100% of the cases, no exception, so does your intelligence goes up. When the IQ goes up. I love the story of Vince Robert. He's from Ottawa, Canada. Vince had a 7th grade education and drove a taxi, 37 years old. And most people would say, now, what kind of a future does this guy have for you? But by some kind of quirk of fate and God's interference in some way, one day he walked in a bookstore and bought a 20-pound Webster's dictionary. And when he started looking, he set it on the front seat of his taxi as he was waiting for fares and so forth. And starting on page 1, he started memorizing the dictionary. Now, before he got even 1/10 of an inch through, he suddenly one day realized something. He said he realized that he was now beginning to understand things he'd only been reading and hearing before. So he decided to take his biggest fare on any given day, every day, and put it in an investment account. In those days, you could invest just a few dollars if you wanted to, and so that's what he did. Well, every day for several years, and he did one other thing. He was willing to give up some of the things he wanted now so he could have the real things he really wanted in the future. He didn't buy fancy clothes, didn't buy a fancy new automobile for his own use, didn't move into fancy apartments and all of that kind of stuff. Well, after just a few years of doing that, he was able to buy the cab company itself. Now, he managed to become a very wealthy man many years before his death, and it started in Automobile University. He was seated right there learning those things while he was just sitting there. But let me tell you something, if you will enroll in Automobile University, you'll make some amazing discovery. University of Southern California did a study. I was a visiting scholar there for 2 years. They found that in 3 years' time, if you live in a metropolitan area and drive 12,000 miles a year, in 3 years' time, you can acquire the equivalent of 2 years of college education in your car. And as you'll see in a few minutes, you will learn things that are not generally taught in public education, but which are critical to success in life. So enroll in Automobile University, got a whole bunch of them right here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I saw hundreds of them last night as we were trying to find a restaurant that would let us in because they weren't overcrowded. But here's some good news. When you recognize, develop, and use what you already know, you will be amazed at your results. Now become a constant student with the right attitude, and you will indeed enjoy a successful, balanced life. I talk a lot about balance because it's one of the most important keys. But I got to tell you that since this is a motivational seminar, I got to tell you that we need to understand that motivation is critically important. And I know I've heard it, and you have too. But Zig, motivation is so temporary. I agree with that. But so is bathing and eating. But if you do it every day, you will live longer and smell better in the process. So we want to look at how do you stay that way once you get that way. One of the things I like to do is I like to tell stories. Many years ago, I made a little presentation, and a nurse named Jan McBarron was there. She was well overweight. She loved being a nurse because she loved to serve other people, and she got a lot of joy from doing that. But she admitted that she was an addictive smoker and on occasion drank a little too much. And then she heard me speak, and I talked about the same thing I'm talking to you about right now, that picture you have of yourself. And when I said to her, it's going to be very difficult, it's going to be hard, but if you will do these things, then you will be so glad that you did. You see, the person you are today will not take you to the place you want to really go. It's growing that is important. Got to tell you, I'm not going to advise you to do anything that I do not do myself. And that is a very important point. I validate things psychologically, theologically, and physiologically before I verbalize them, write them, or record them, because we are physical, we're mental, and when we consider that, we also have got to understand, ladies and gentlemen, there are so many things that we can do. But I want to also emphasize this. You might not be what you say you are, but what you say you are. Charles Osgood, the CBS word merchant, says, compared to the spoken word, a picture is a pitiful thing indeed. And even if it's not spoken, if it's thought, if you put yourself down, ladies and gentlemen, you got a problem. How many of you know anything about watching a golf tournament on television? How many of you know who Phil Mickelson is? Can I see your hands, please? How many of you know that he kind of blew it and lost the U.S. Open? You remember that? Do you remember what he said in the interview? I'm an idiot. That is absolutely devastating for a man or a woman to say that about themselves. Now, Phil Mickelson, for example, has won at least 2 majors, numerous PGA tours. His priorities are in perfect order. One of the tournaments he was in, he said, if my wife starts to have this baby, even if I'm lining up to sink the putt on the final hole, I'm headed home. His priorities are right. For him to call himself an idiot was absolutely terrible. And the reason I say that, he's really criticizing the Creator. See, God doesn't create idiots. He really does not. And when a man like that, doing so much with his priorities in order, no way. When we look in the mirror, you always want to say, I am that third person. As a matter of fact, today, when you go past the mirror, I want you to pause. Don't stay long, but just look at the mirror and say, you know, I really am that third person. And that's important because what you say determines, it reveals what your values are. And that's important because your values determine your behavior. Your behavior determines your reputation. Your reputation determines your advantages. Many, many years ago, Harvard psychologist Dr. William James said, the greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes of mind. Got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you were born to win. But to be a winner, you must plan to win, prepare to win, and expect to win. But to win big, you will need a much bigger frying pan. Yeah, you heard it right. You got to have a bigger frying pan. I'm a boxing fan. For years and years, I followed the heavyweight division going way back to John L. Sullivan. I read all of the stories about them. When Gentleman Jim Corbett was in contention, he was a heavyweight champion at that moment, and he loved to fish. One day he was out doing his road work, running around a lake, and he noticed a fisherman there who was having a fisherman's dream day. He'd cast out, pull in, cast out, pull in, cast out, pull in. But then Corbett noticed something. He was taking the big fish and throwing them back, and then taking the little fish and keeping them. He was, amused and concerned and puzzled. So he ran over to the fisherman and said, "Sir, I love to fish myself, but you're doing something I've never seen another fisherman do. When you catch a big one, you throw him back. When you catch a little one, you keep it. Why do you do that?" The fisherman sadly shook his head and he said, "Man, I don't have no choice. You see, all I've got is just a little old bitty frying pan." How many times do we as people say, "Lord, don't give me such a big idea. You see, that'll stretch me. That'll make me work harder. That will make me give up some of my TV time. Don't do that, Lord. Just give me a simple one so I can have my own life my own way. Besides, all I've got's just a little old bitty frying pan." Well, I got good news for you, folks. God does not issue small frying pans. He only issues big ones. I want you to start thinking in terms not of what you are, but what you're capable of becoming. And so growth will be one of the prime things we'll be talking about, because it is critically important that we understand that. I never will forget when we first moved I moved to Dallas, Texas. I heard a story about a lady that went to her lawyer to talk about a divorce. And the lawyer said, well, why are you divorcing the man? And she just kind of started rambling on, you know. And he said, no. He said, be something specific. And she said, like how? He said, well, do you have any grounds? She said, oh, yes. He said, we've got about 30 acres right out here on the north end of town. He said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Do you have a grudge? She said, no, but we do have a neat little carport on the side of the house. He said, man, we need to make it personal. And she said, well, like how? Well, he said, do you accept any responsibility? She said, like how? He said, well, do you ever wake up grouchy? She said, oh, no, I just let him get up every day on his own whenever he will. And he said, well, let me ask you a question. Does he ever beat you up? She said, oh, no, I'm up every day at least an hour, hour and a half before it even turns over. And the lawyer said, well, ma'am, I said, I'm having trouble. Why do you want to divorce the man? And she said, well, truthfully, the guy just can't communicate. We want to talk about communication. So communication is very, very important. And not only will I talk about it, ladies and gentlemen, but what my associate, Chris Dunham, who will speak next, will also be talking about communication skills a little more, right down to the very point. But how many of you, this is a very important question, how many of you consider yourself to be honest and at least reasonably intelligent? May I see your hands, please? How many of you honest, intelligent people, as a general rule, get about twice as much work done on the day before you go on vacation? Can I see your hands, please? All right. Second question. How much more did you know on the day before you went on vacation than you knew the day before? Would you agree that it's minuscule, just a very, very little bit? And yet you doubled your performance. Why is that? Well, if we can figure out why and learn how, and then repeat it every day without working any longer or any harder, does it make more sense that we would be more effective on our job, more beneficial to ourselves, to our family, to the company, and to the community? Does that make sense? Answer is yes. I'll help you with the tough ones, okay? There's no question about it. How many of you on the night before, the day before vacation, incidentally, we're on pages 82 and 83 of your workbook, and you might want to take some notes as we go along. How many of you have noticed on the day before vacation that the night before that day, you got your laptop out, or just a sheet of paper, and said, tomorrow I got to do this, and this, and this, and this. That's what we call short-term goal setting. Now, how many of you also on the day before vacation, when you got to work the next day because you had lined out a plan of action, how many of you when you got to work immediately got busy and went to work, okay? How many of you have noticed that as a general rule, people with nothing to do want to do it with you? Can I see your hands? Did you know that according to the research, a little over 1 hour every day is wasted in idle conversation. Much of it gossip, having nothing to do with your performance on the job or helping anybody else perform better. On a typical day, how many times do we see people walking around, and somebody says, I want to ask you a question. It won't take but a minute. And somebody else says, wait, I just have another question myself. It'll take about 2 minutes. A little over an hour a day is wasted in idle gossip every day. That's 5 hours a week. That's 250 hours a year. That's 6 weeks of life totally gone to waste. As a matter of fact, I just told you a half-truth, because when you're talking to those folks, ladies and gentlemen, that means at least 2 people are involved. I have no research to prove this, but I believe that many small companies have gone bankrupt because they did not recognize the value of a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes. Roger Staubach, went to Naval Academy, and then he played football for the Cowboys. Roger Staubach told me one day when we were together, he said, Zig, I did something that a lot of people find a little surprising. I made my best grades during football season. He said, my schedule was so tough, and the practice was so demanding. When I finished the practice every day, he said, I immediately took a shower, immediately got into my books. I recognized it's not lack of time that we suffer from. It's lack of direction and commitment in our lives. A minute can be enormously important, depending entirely on which side of the bathroom door you're standing on. So when we start taking care of our minutes, now you know earthquakes and hurricanes get all the publicity, but did you know that termites do more damage than both of them? And they take such little bitty bites, but there's so many of them, and they keep on biting and biting and biting. Little things done on a daily basis as a habit will make all the difference in the world. The reason on that day before vacation you get more done is you've got a game plan and you accepted responsibility to following through on it. That's the reason you perform better. And I want you to think about this. If planning one day of your life can make such a radical difference in that day, what a difference a game plan for life would make. Now what I'm really talking about is attitude. Attitude involves everything that we do. And I'm also, ladies and gentlemen, want to tell you what the healthiest attitude of all is. It's the attitude of gratitude. Psychologically speaking, Dr. Frank Menrith of the world-renowned Menrith Clinic says the more you express gratitude for what you have, the more you will have to express gratitude for. And then he said on the other side of the coin, the more you complain about the problems you have, the more problems you will have to complain about. You see, in our society, we have far too many people walking around looking like the picture on their driver's license. Acting like somebody licked all of the red off of the candy, acting like the cruise director for the Titanic. We need to understand what impact that has on ourselves and on other people. The more you complain about those problems, so if you want problems, ladies and gentlemen, that's where you get them. Here's what I have noticed for many, many years. When you ask a typical person how you doing, the most popular answer is not too bad. And once in a while somebody says, I'm doing good. Some people say, wonderfully well. Some people say, well, under the circumstances, making you wonder what they're doing under there in the first place. Some will say, so far so good, expecting it to get worse. The correct answer, and when I'm talking with any of you after this is all over, here's the answer. I'm going to ask you how you're doing, and here's the correct answer. I'm doing better than good. That's the correct answer always. You might say, well, suppose I'm not doing better than good. Am I telling the truth? Of course you are. You're just telling it in advance, that's all. You do expect it to get better, don't you? Now, that answer is a first person, present tense, positive affirmation of who you are, where you are, and in many cases, whose you are. I will absolutely guarantee you when somebody asks you how you're doing, if you will say that, one person out of three will comment, man, I like that. Or what'd you say? Or, I'm going to start doing that myself. In management and leadership, ladies and gentlemen, when one of your associates that's on the payroll there does something good, instead of saying, that was good, why don't you say, as I've looked at things that are good and looking at what you're doing, I got to tell you, this job was done better than good. I guarantee you they will cherish that one from here on in. And our relationships, which we'll be talking about, are so terribly, terribly important. But I want to show you something about conversation and what people say to each other, particularly in leadership and management. Now, here's something I learned, ladies and gentlemen, from a little lady with a 5th grade education. She was my mama. My dad died when I was 5. There were 6 of us at home, too young to work. The Depression was on. We survived because we had 3 milk cows and a big garden. Never will I forget my first solo assignment in the garden. I was 8 years old. I had some beans that needed some tending. My mama called me out to hoe the 2 rows of beans, and they were long rows. She told me, she said, now when you get through, call me. I'll be working on the other side of the garden. I want to look it over. So when she gave me the complete instructions, and then when I got through, I finally said, Mama, I'm done. My mama was a little lady, wore a cloth sunbonnet over her face to protect it from that hot Mississippi sun. I said, I'm done, Mama, and she walked over. When she got about 10 paces from the row of beans, she started shaking her head. I said, what's the matter, Mama? And my mama looked at me and kind of smiled and said, son, you're going to have to lick this calf over. Now, how many of you are so underprivileged that you do not clearly understand that perfectly plain Mississippi colloquialism, lick that calf over? How many of you don't understand that or never heard it? Well, don't be embarrassed about it. You know, a lot of people are just ignorant about the positive things. I was privileged. I learned that was what she was saying was, son, you got to do this over. Now, let me tell you what was said. For most boys, what you've done would be all right. But you're not most boys. You're my son. And my son can do better than this. She raised the bar on performance. So let's look at what else was involved in that simple statement that she made. Now, first of all, always in business, you first of all instruct. Quickly, the group will understand that you expect their best. My mama didn't expect us to be the best at everything we did, but she expected us always to do our best. She set some standards. We knew she was going to inspect to make certain she got what she expected. She criticized the performance. Listen carefully, please. She praised the performer. That showed respect and self-worth. 46% of the people who voluntarily, according to the Department of Labor, 46% of those who voluntarily leave their job do so because they do not feel respected and or appreciated. And what a loss it is when we lose a productive worker because we do not respect them. My mama never said this, but failure is an event, folks. She respected and enhanced my self-worth. Again, I'm talking about attitude. I was stunned, surprised, and delighted to come across a quote a few weeks ago, and it seemed so different about what the man had always done that I had my executive assistant, who's been with me 29 years, to do the search on the internet to find out if Thomas Jefferson really did say this. And within a matter of minutes, she called back and said, yep, Thomas Jefferson said, nothing can stop the man with the right mental attitude from achieving his goals. Nothing on earth can help the man with the wrong mental attitude. Got some good news for you, folks. You don't have a great attitude because you're successful. You are successful because you have a great attitude. Your attitude is something that you can control. Being raised in Yazoo City, Mississippi, the heart of the Depression, as a child with 6 of the children too small to work publicly, I learned some very important things just by watching. I noticed there were a lot of people in that little town who wore nice clothes, drove nice cars, lived in nice houses, took nice trips, and played golf at the country club. In every decade of my life, I've noticed that what happens out there can affect us. But the most important thing that happens and will influence your life is what happens in you. Study was done on 300 world-class leaders. I'm talking about Roosevelt and Churchill and Mahatma Gandhi. I'm talking about Mother Teresa and Helen Keller. I'm talking about people like that. 75% of them either had serious abuse problems at home, or had some serious physical problems, or had been abused as children. And yet, these people went ahead because they understood. It's not what happens to you, it's how you handle what happens to you that will make the difference. The people in Yazoo City understood something very basic. They understood that there was nothing they could do about the national economy, but there was a whole lot they could do about their personal economy. They decided to accept that responsibility. That's the reason they performed. In every decade, I've noticed the same thing. Most people do not pay any attention to media predictions about the, how the financial situation is. As you know, the media has accurately predicted 28 of the last 2 recessions. And so they just simply don't pay any attention to it. We have a choice. We can either choose it. The last one we had in America, somebody asked me if we got involved in that, and I said, no, we had a meeting and we decided not to participate in the recession. You see, it's in here, so much of it. Yes, does the other have any effect? Of course it does. But it has a whole lot more, ladies and gentlemen, if we clearly understand that we were designed on purpose, by a purpose, and we have responsibility. Now, I got to tell you, we're going to talk about the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, because we got to have balance in life. For 24 years of my adult life, by choice, I weighed well over 200 pounds. I say by choice because I've never accidentally eaten anything. And when I choose to eat too much, I have chosen to weigh too much. When I was 25 years old, I weighed 225 pounds. On July 4th, 1972, I got on a sensible eating and exercise program. Up until then, my idea of exercise simply was to fill the tub, take a bath, pull the plug, and fight the current. And that's not much of an exercise program. So I started eating sensibly and exercising regularly. And to this date, I exercise at least 3 times a week. My schedule prohibits it from being all the way. I do the aerobic exercises. I do the weightlifting. I had to ease up on the weightlifting a little bit because I was bulking up. A lot of folks thought I was on steroids. And folks, you know, you gotta preserve your reputation. I've already said that. It is very, very important. But what I want to talk about too is, how do you get more of the things that money will buy and all of the things that money won't buy? See, I like what money buys. Nice clothes, nice car, nice house, nice trips, and all that kind of stuff. But money will buy all of those things. I love what money won't buy. Money bought me a nice house, but it won't buy me a home. It'll buy me a companion, won't buy me a friend. It'll buy me a good time, won't buy me peace of mind. It'll buy me a bed, but it won't buy me a good night's sleep. Now, interestingly enough, the more of the things you have that money won't buy will enable you to get more of the things that money will buy. Your stress level is dramatically reduced. You're happier, you're healthier, you get along better with the folks at home. It's kind of interesting, but that is an absolute fact. It reduces your stress level, and as we'll discover, the same process that reduces stress in 90% of all visits to medical doctors is directly or indirectly related to stress. The more of the things you have that money won't buy will enable you to get more of the things that money will buy. So you reduce stress financially, you reduce stress personally. That's what makes better performance in our lives. For years, in all of my travels, and I've had the privilege of speaking on every continent in the world with people on it, and I've always asked them, what is it you really want out of life? And here's been the consistent response, not always in the same order, but we discover that everybody wants to be happy and healthy, at least reasonably prosperous. I know some of you not only want to be reasonably prosperous, you want to be unreasonably prosperous, and some of you are. And I have no fault with that. I've had money and I haven't had money, and I got to tell you, everything else being equal, I prefer to have it, all right? Everybody wants to be secure. They want to have friends and peace of mind and good family relationships and the hope that the future is going to be even better. Now, for that to happen, you got to deal with all of life, your personal life, your family, and your career, the financial life, the physical, mental, and the spiritual. And folks, the neat thing is, we also have needs, and the most famous need and the most important one, we need to love and we need to be loved. But Zig, is it being loved up to someone else? Well, a little bit of it is. But let me tell you something, folks. Most of it is left up to you, whether you're loved or not. Let me tell you what I've been doing for many, many years. Whether I'm right here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, or Auckland, New Zealand, or Yazoo City, Mississippi, I always greet people the same way. I always say good morning. And according to actual count, over 80% of the people, whether it's 9 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night, will instinctively respond similarly. Good morning. And then almost 90% of them immediately say, but it's not morning. Then I would say, well, how come you say morning? They said, because you said morning. I said, it makes a wonderful lifetime point. When you go out in life looking for friends, they're going to be scarce. When you go out in life to be a friend, you'll find them everywhere. Because what you send out is exactly what you will get back. See, people don't really care how much you know until they discover how much you know and love about them. Great lesson in life. I've had a lot of fun with that, but more fun because it really is such a great truth in life. We've built our career and our lives on this basic principle. You can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want. I've tested it over and over. It works in your personal, family, and business life. It works as a coach. It works as a minister. It works as a boss. It works everywhere. But in order to get all of those things, we got to deal with all of life. We got to deal with the physical aspect of life. Physically fit people are more intellectually inclined. That surprises a lot of people. Emotionally stable, composed, self-confident, easygoing, and relaxed. That study was done at Purdue University. And we got to bring balance in our life. And you deal with the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. That's what you're doing. Dave Jensen of UCLA did a study on the people who attend these big Peter Lowe seminars and who have participated in our Born to Win seminar. And what he found was this: those with a balanced goals program. You know, everybody's got goals. Did you know bank robbers had goals? So do drug addicts and alcoholics. But those with a balanced goals program, regardless of their profession, regardless of what their job was, they earned a little over twice as much money, were happier, healthier, and got along better with the folks at home. Now, why would that be? Well, you think about it for a moment. If you know where you're going and have a plan to get there, you just don't sweat the small stuff. That's a very important point. When you know where you're going and have a plan to get there, ladies and gentlemen, you don't sweat the small stuff. Now, let me point out something else, ladies and gentlemen. You are what you are and where you are because of what's gone into your mind. Did you know, and if you did know, did you realize that for nearly 200 years, our founding fathers produced, through the use of a fascinating little book titled The New England Primer? That's the size of it. This was their textbook. Now, what did this little textbook teach? According to the Thomas Jefferson Research Institute, what they learned was that something like 90% of all of the educational, informational thrust was of a religious, moral, ethical nature. By 1950, the percentage was so small you could not measure it, and by 1960, it was anti-God, anti-Christian. Read yesterday's paper, or today's, or tomorrow. You'll read about corporate scandals, government scandals. You'll read about violence. You'll read about the problems in the home with marriage and all of those other things. Now, why did those things did not happen those first 200 years? Now, some of them did, but not anything like the corporate and government scandals we go on today. For example, here's some of the first grade words that were used in those years: abominable, benediction, declaration, enunciation, generation. Those are 5 and 6 syllable words. And what was the catechism? Pray to God, love God, fear God, serve God, take not God's name in vain, do not swear, do not steal, cheat not in your play, and play not with bad boys. I thought that was a little sexist, but, you know, there it was right there. You know how they taught the alphabet? A, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. B, heaven to find the Bible mind. It even tells you how to go to heaven right here in this little book. It's a fabulous bit of information. I believe we need to go back to the 1770s, not just the 1970s. Physical, mental, and spiritual, yes, it all makes a difference. Now, a lot of times people say, well, you know, I don't go along with that spiritual stuff. In my research, I've done two things. Number one, I discovered that the more birthdays you have, the longer you live, and that's been validated. Number two, I discovered that you're going to be dead a lot longer than you're going to be alive, and that too has been validated. And so I want to share with you something here, ladies and gentlemen, that was published by the Heritage Foundation several years ago. Churches, I mean families that go to church on a regular basis, for the family it reduces suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, crime, out-of-wedlock births, and divorce. These people are far happier and healthier, have a lower rate of depression, higher self-esteem, longer happy marriages. And folks, now the Dallas Morning News is a family newspaper, but look what it put right there: better sex. Now, folks, all I'm telling you is this ain't a bad deal. I'm telling you, this ain't a bad deal. As a matter of fact, I have been told that every time I speak in the community, church attendance goes up, and I can understand why I do. Ladies and gentlemen, it helps inner city youth escape poverty, and the family income difference figures out to be $111 a month more for the families that go to church. Why is that? It is because they're being fed the truth. Good, clean, pure, positive information that guides them through the pitfalls of life. Psychiatrist Smiley Blanton says he has never seen a senile person, regardless of age, who did three things: stayed active physically, continued to grow mentally, and developed a genuine interest in other people. Doing these things, he said, will enable you to maintain your mental capabilities regardless of age. I'll soon celebrate the 59th anniversary of my 21st birthday. And for those of you who are mathematically challenged, that means in November I'll be 80. Now, when I start thinking about health and how you feel and all, I'm absolutely convinced that it started back in 1972, really, when I realized that my body was the temple of my soul. So I started taking care of the temple. And that's one of the reasons I believe my energy level is so high. I don't worry about things. I'm already registered in heaven. Why should I worry about tomorrow? And the reality, ladies and gentlemen, is you don't have a great attitude because you're successful. You're successful because you have a great attitude. And that attitude is always built on truth and character. Arthur Friedman said that men of genius are admired, men of wealth are envied, men of power are feared, but only men of character are trusted. And how true that is. And Karl Barth said, though no one can go back and make a brand new start, anyone can start from now and make a brand new ending. When we as individuals understand that failure is an event, it's not a person. I was broke and in debt. My career was going nowhere when I was 45 years old. I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, as I read about one of the senior citizens recently, he said, I've been there, done that, forgot what it was. Now, so we need to look at what we can do now, where we are with what we have. Here's something very, very important. In times of change, the learned shall inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that. We cannot become what we need to be by remaining what we are. I hope you've already noticed that when I quote somebody, I always give them credit. I do that for three reasons. Number one, it's the right thing to do. Number two, it shows I've done my research. Number three, if it's wrong, I can always say, you know, that fellow ought to have known better than that. Okay. Now, what am I getting at? I'm getting right back to attitude, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I'm really getting at. And I'm talking about growth. Laurie Majors, who finished the 10th grade, has been my executive assistant for 29 years. She's by far the best one I've ever had. And I'm going to tie this together with a couple of little facts that I think are very, very important. Laurie Majors, I was a visiting scholar at the University of Southern California for 2 years. While there, they were doing a study, found that in 3 years' time in your automobile, if you drive 12,000 miles a year in a metropolitan area, you can acquire the equivalent of 2 years of college education in your automobile. Every morning on their way to work, Laurie Majors, that 10th grade dropout, is listening in Automobile University to the CDs. It teaches her things she wants to know, reminds her of things that she needs to know, and on the way home she does exactly the same thing. She reads good books. She goes to good seminars like you're doing now. She wants to continue to grow. A few years ago, we evaluated our key personnel, and she's certainly very key. She checked out at slightly above the master's degree level. She did not make that big move in 1 year or even 1 month. It was over a period of time, the consistency of understanding something. Now, she had the good fortune when she was 9 years old, she was watching television. There was a show going on titled Private Secretary. Ann Southern was a star. When she was 9 years old, she decided for the rest of her life she was going to be seeking work as a private secretary and work with one individual. Laurie Majors made that as a commitment. Her purpose in life was defined. And at our company, she's been with us, let's say, 29 years. She's been offered many times to move up the ladder. She said, oh no, that would be down the ladder for me. Here is my purpose in life to help this one man, and she's been incredibly helpful to me all of those years. When you have a purpose well defined, if it's honorable, even noble, you will almost never abandon your purpose. You hang in there, you stay with it. Makes all the difference in the world. Laurie Majors found her purpose. She decided to stay with it, and I got to tell you, she is one more happy camper. Automobile University. Well, the question is, when do you learn? Where do you learn? How do you learn? What do you learn? Well, we built our career teaching things not generally taught in formal education. And we encouraged our children to we'd be willing to pay for all the education they wanted to get. Regardless of how you get it, education is important, but everything is not taught in classrooms in formal education. For example, they don't teach you how to build and maintain a winning attitude. Is that important? You decide. It dramatically reduces, we teach you how to dramatically reduce stress, how to set and reach goals, how to develop a healthy self-image, how to build winning relationships, and how to stay motivated. And since nearly 100% of all of the counseling is because of relationship difficulties, husband, wife, parent, child, teacher, student, employer, employee, neighbor, neighbor, sibling, sibling, nearly 100% of it, that tells me that our relationships play a critically important place in our lives. I love the story. The fellow that walked in the bookstore walked up to the lady manager and said, ma'am, can you tell me where I can find the book, Man, the Superior Sex? She said, oh yes, it's upstairs in the science fiction department. Now, when all of us clearly understand there is no such thing as a superior sex, there's no such thing as a superior race, that will open the door to conversation with all people, regardless of their ethnicity. Spent all that money on my eyes, and now my mouth fouls up. But anyhow, it does make a huge difference the way we see people in this global world. It makes all the difference in the world. I'll guarantee you, you will cash a check that anybody gives you, if it's a check is a good one, regardless of whether they're black, white, or anything in between, whether they're tall or short, whether they go to a different church or have any faith at all. You really need to get along to the best of your ability. That does not mean that you approve of what they're doing. That simply means you respect their rights to believe what they want. In my lifetime, I've been so fortunate. God has put in my life incredibly significant people who taught me things I needed to know at that stage of my life. And for whatever reason, He put minority after minority after minority in my life. I'm a Christian today because on July 4th, 1972, an elderly black lady spent the weekend in our home. She's the instrument God used to bring me into the kingdom. My closest friend for over 40 years is a Jewish gentleman from Winnipeg, Canada. He's the first person outside of my family to believe I had a career as a speaker. 3 American Indians had a huge impact on my life. One in my sales career, one in my speaking career, one in my spiritual life. My daughter-in-law is from Campeche, Mexico. Our number 1 salesperson is a young black man. Our number 2 is a young white man. I have what I call my wall of gratitude. There are 26 men and women on it who impacted my life in a positive way. If you don't get anything else from this presentation today, I plead with you, establish your own wall of gratitude. It could be a parent, a cousin, a boss, a neighbor, a pastor, a sales manager. It could be anybody. But if they had a positive impact on your life, get their picture, get them to autograph it, put up your own wall of gratitude. I'll guarantee you, every time you see it, you'll pause just for a second and say, man, I'm sure glad she came into my life, or he came into my life. All the difference in the world. My daughter-in-law from Campeche, Mexico, the mother of our granddaughter, one I call Little Promise. What a delight it was. And incidentally, for what it's worth, had we known grandchildren were going to be so much fun, we certainly would have been nicer to their parents. I mean, it's just one of those facts of life. So your relationships make a significant difference in your life. I got to tell you, my favorite writers, for example, are all Jews. David, Solomon, Matthew, Mark, you begin to get the drift of where I'm going on that one, don't you? Okay. Now, let me tell you something, folks. How do we do the things we want to do? How do we build those relationships? Never will I forget one morning in the bedroom, the redhead and I were talking, having a quiet cup of coffee. And then she softly said to me, you know, honey, I wish I were younger. I said, for crying out loud, why? She said, if I were younger, I could be married to you even longer. How do you build a relationship like that? You don't build it with a big honeymoon or big anniversary presents or huge vacations. You build it with little bitty things you do every day. I can tell you, I saw her on September 15th, 1944, 9:08 p.m., YWCA, Jackson, Mississippi. Now, I was not in love with her, but I knew one thing instantly. When I saw that 16-year-old beauty, I knew I was going to get to know her a whole lot better. So 2 years, 11 months, and 9 days later of relentless pursuit, she finally said, okay, I do. To this day, after 59 years of marriage, I court that woman every day of my life. I strive to score points in little bitty ways. In all of these years of marriage, and I got to tell you, she's a wonderful door opener. She's one of the best car door openers I've ever seen. Despite the fact that she's opened her own door when I was with her less than a dozen times. But every time I walk around the car to open it, I'm reminded, here's the most important person on this earth to me. Here's the one I love above all others. Years ago, I stopped carrying my money in a wallet. I folded over and put it in my pocket. I started laying my money on the bathroom counters. She started counting that money. And when she did not think I had enough, as she did not before I left home this time, if she didn't think I had enough to cover emergencies where cash was needed, she'd go get me some more. Now, that's not a big deal unless you understand what it really is, and that's a huge deal. She said something with that action. Honey, you're very special and important to me. I love you very much. I'll be more comfortable knowing that if there's an emergency and you need cash, you'll neither be embarrassed, delayed, or perhaps even endangered. Little things like that. For years and years and years, when my telephone rings in my office, I do all of my writing at home. I answer the telephone by saying, good morning, this is Gene Ziglar's happy husband. And fellas, I got to tell you, it doesn't take long, and I score big points every time I do that. I got to tell you, courtship is a lifetime process. It really, really is. Dr. Dean Ornish of Harvard University says your relationship with your loved ones is more important to your physical health than the food you eat, the exercise program you're on, or even the genes you have inherited. We need to understand, fellas, that men and women are different and need to be treated differently. For example, ladies, let me tell you something about your husband. He doesn't give a hoot about what's on television. All he wants to know is what else is on television. And husbands, I got to tell you something about your wives. They resent it when you ignore them all day. Then give them your undivided attention when the lights go out at night. They want a hug when all you got on your mind is a hug. They want you to court them on the front porch, front yard, living room, dining room, bedroom, kitchen. They want you to tell them how grateful you are and how excited you are that they decided to say yes that day. They want to be loved and appreciated, and they want to be constantly courted. I got to tell you, when you give her the attention, you will have no interest in it giving anybody else of the other sex any attention of a sexual nature is what I'm talking about. I got to tell you, folks, it really does make a difference. If we understand something at home as well as in the job, it's the story of the little guy who was confronted by 3 big bullies, any one of whom could have obliterated him, and looked like one of them was about to do that. Smart little fella. He looked at the biggest of the 3 bullies, stepped back about 10 paces, took a little stick, drew a line on the ground, and said to him, "Now you just step across that line." The big bully confidently stepped across the line. The little guy just grinned and said, "Now, we're both on the same side." When husbands and wives clearly understand they should be on the same side, that's when the marriage gets better. In management and leadership, when both worker and owner decide and declare and understand that they're both on the same side, that's when it gets better and better and better, because fairness comes in. Now, I got to tell you, folks, the first 25 years of our marriage, we had an awful lot of financial troubles. I was what I called a wandering generality. I was always looking for the next get-rich-quick scheme. I got involved in a dozen of them, and I finally realized that I wouldn't get rich quick. I was slowly going dead broke. And so I decided instead of that, I'd go to work. I would set some objectives, and I start doing the right thing. It's made all, and incidentally, I've always been enthusiastic, always been motivated, always been honest, always worked hard, all of those things. But I got to tell you, folks, that doesn't necessarily always solve all of the problems. Relationships are so critically important. Calvert Robert researched and studied, done at both Harvard and Yale, and followed up by the Carnegie Foundation, which spent $1 million and 5 years in research, learned that 85% of the reason you get a job and get ahead in that job is because of your people, knowledge, and skill. There you go with those relationships. About 20 years ago, a young man named Steve Walker sat in my office. He was from Toronto, Canada. A good friend of his had brought him to Dallas because I'd agreed to visit with Steve, because Steve had built his ladder against the wrong wall. His mentor, his boss, Steve was trying to follow his boss, and his boss was an unusual person. And so when Steve got there, I said, "Steve, well, I understand your boss is your mentor, is your role model." He said, "That's right." I said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Because he is." "And why do you follow him?" He said, "It is because he is the most successful man that I have ever known." And I said, "Well, how do you define success, Steve?" And he started kind of rambling a bit, but he finally, took him about 15 minutes. He said, "What I'm now going to show you, and here's where I really want you to pay close attention, because this says an awful lot these next few minutes do." Now, what Steve said to me, and it took him about 20 minutes to get it out, but if you remember the list I went over earlier, he said, "Well, I got to tell you, I believe if you're happy, healthy," and he went right down the list. He said, "I believe if you got all of those things, then you're successful." I said, "Well, Steve, let's do something that many people are afraid to do. Let's evaluate your boss. Just how successful is this man that you've been following, working 70 hours a week for all of these years? Your family was suffering. Your own health was suffering. You went to sleep on several trips back and forth, threatened to kill yourself. Your wife was very unhappy. The kids were not doing that well either. Why are you following a man like that? Let's evaluate him and see how successful he is. I want you to do this. Have your own little list. Give yourself a plus or a minus on each one of these things. Now, some people, you know, they don't want to do this because it might reveal something they don't need to know. Well, these are the people that I always say they're in denial. They think denial is just a river in Egypt. I got to tell you, folks, denial is a very destructive force. So I said, Steve, tell me about your boss. How happy is your boss? And he paused for a minute and he said, well, I don't think he's happy at all. I said, why do you say that? Well, he said he seldom smiles and never laughs, and besides, he's got ulcers. Well, then I said, and here's what I want you to do. Would you evaluate him as happy? He said, oh, absolutely not. I said, well, how healthy is he? He said, well, I've already told you he's got ulcers. So that answers that. No, not there. How prosperous is he? Man alive, he's got money going out of his ears. Okay, we'll give him a plus on that one. Okay, I said, how secure is he? Now, let me tell you something, folks. When I asked that question, I'd already said to him about security. It was more than just money, but he wasn't listening very. How secure is he? He said, well, initially he said he's as secure as money could make you. But now when we started evaluating, I said, well, Steve, let me ask you. In Dallas, we had 2 billionaires who are now broke. Your boss has got a lot of money, he's still making more. Does it compare? Oh, he said, absolutely not. I said, well, our ex-governor had $500 million. He's now broke, went bankrupt. How does your boss? Oh, he doesn't have that kind of money either. So as I pulled out this list, as I went down the list, and here's what I said to him. I said, now you've already said he's not happy. You already said he's not healthy, but you have said that he's making a lot of money and he's prosperous. But he doesn't compare to the others, so we're going to give him a plus. But let me tell you something, Steve. Prosperity just buys so much. Did you know this generation of people is the richest generation our country's ever produced? 73% of them are not satisfied with their lives. Money will not always buy happiness. As a matter of fact, it seldom does. I said, how secure is your boss? He's as secure as money can make you. And then I gave him that story of those 2 billionaires. How many friends does he have? Well, I got to tell you, and I'll go ahead and put this other overhead back up, or here's this other overhead. How many friends does he have? How prosperous is he? How secure is he? How many friends does he have? He's been getting minus. And peace of mind, ulcers, minus, family relationships. His wife is divorcing him. How much hope does he have? And this has an interesting answer. I said, how much hope does your boss have? He said, well, before I started talking to you, I thought he had a lot. Now I don't think he has any at all. So I said, Steve, let's go down that list of these things. Let me see what we've got. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 minuses. We've got 1 plus there, but we're going to put a question mark simply there because we don't know just how secure he is. How happy is he? He gets a minus on that. How healthy? He gets a minus on that. And ladies and gentlemen, when you start adding it all together, then I asked Steve the same question I'm now going to ask you. Would you change places with anybody? But in the process, you had to give up your family, your health, your friends, all those other things. I don't know. Interestingly enough, ladies and gentlemen, 90% of the people agree, a Gallup poll, that the most important part of their life was their relationship with their loved ones. But guess where they spend all of their time? They said by Gallup that it was even more important than corporate position or bucks in the bank. But where do they spend their time? They spend it getting corporate position and putting bucks in the bank. And unless you have a balanced goals program and plan those things, they simply will not happen. So we need to look at that very, very carefully. Physically, mentally, and spiritual. When we look at the spiritual side of life, ladies and gentlemen, here's what we found. Regular church service attendance reduces suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, crime, out of wedlock births, divorce, far happier and healthier, lower rate of depression, higher self-esteem, longer and happy marriages, and better sex, as we've already stated. There's some good things that happen. And people who go to church get good information in most cases, and the bottom line is they simply do not have anything like the stress that is so prevalent in our society. Psychiatrist Smiley Blanton, who worked with Dr. Norman Vincent Peale for many years, said, in my career, I have never dealt with a person suffering from dementia, regardless of age, who did three things: stayed active physically, kept learning mentally, and developed a genuine interest in other people. What do you learn? Well, in Automobile University, you learn how to build and maintain a winning attitude, how to set and reach goals, how to develop a healthy self-image, how to build winning relationships, and how to stay motivated. A pleasing personality helps you to win friends and influence people. Add character to that formula, and you keep those friends and you maintain the influence. One of my favorite reference books is an 1828 Noah Webster Dictionary. In those days, they identified words for what they meant. In that dictionary, you can look up the word optimism, and it says the opinion or doctrine that everything in nature is ordered for the best, or the order of things in the universe that is adapted to produce the most good. Translation, optimism is a godly thing to have. How many people do you encourage with negative and things that are not really good? That dictionary did not define the word pessimist or pessimism. We were a young nation. Everybody was gung-ho. You'll have to find it in a new dictionary if you're going to find it anywhere, and you will find it there. So when you talk about attitude, let me tell you, and if I get to talk to any of you before we get away, when they ask you how you're doing, instead of the usual mundane things like not too bad and the other things, simply look at them and say, I'm doing better than good. It's amazing what will happen, particularly if you keep on learning and studying. In times of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. For over 30 years, I've read an average of 3 hours a day. Read my Bible every day, read the paper every day. That way I know what both sides are up to. And I just happen to believe that is very, very important. When you start looking at all of these things, when you become a constant student, that's when your growth is more substantial. And your motivation and your inspiration and your knowledge. And here's been one of my most interesting discoveries, and I've now written a book on it. It won't be out for quite a little while yet, but how to develop a creative imagination. The more you know about anything, the more creative you become when you add additional information to that. When I wrote Secrets of Closing the Sale, which is the first book and only book as a manual on how the processes that you follow in sales, only a book in New York Times, first time in that category that ever reached the bestseller stage. Now, what happened was very important. When I read that book, when I had 98% of it written, somebody sent me a little short three-paragraph summation. And what this little 3 paragraphs said was, this is the heart of the sale. It was 3 short paragraphs. I read those 3 paragraphs, and I added 50 pages to the book. I'd been selling since I was 8, been sales training since I was 21. I knew a lot about sales. The new information revolutionized a whole lot of things. Keep on growing. It helps a whole lot of people. When you talk about relationships, Harvard Business Class in 1949, almost little over 49% of all of the graduates, a study was done on them, and this class of 1949, 49% of them were at least vice presidents in major corporations. When asked how they accounted for that, and CNN did a telecast on these men, they said, well, number one, our wives were supportive. Their careers were built on integrity. They were risk takers, but they did not, they were not gamblers. What do we do at our company? How many of the things do we teach, and what do I teach that are so important to me as I'm talking about it now? Our mission statement includes a big frying pan to be the difference maker in the personal, family, professional, and spiritual lives of enough people to make a positive difference in the world. That's a pretty audacious mission statement, ladies and gentlemen, but it's got to be built on character. Are we being successful in that? Well, over 40 languages of what I've been teaching have been printed and used. We've got several information bits that really have made a difference in the lives of other people. In short, with 40 translations of our work in different languages, we're reaching an awful lot of people. Now, we teach things that are generally not taught in school, as I already have said, but I want to talk about another little factor. 90% of the visits to medical doctors are directly or indirectly related to stress. 90%. If we can reduce stress, and incidentally, the same process that reduces stress is exactly the same process that will enable you to have a long-term balanced career. My stress level, and I face as many deadlines as anybody you know. It's always a book production, a class I'm teaching, a seminar I'm presenting, and each one of them requires time and concentration. Example, how many of you feel like I've made this talk before? Can I see your hand, please? Several hundred times. I made it yesterday. You know what I did between yesterday and today? I spent over 6 hours getting ready for today. You see, I think it would be arrogant if I thought I could stand up and spit it out just because I did it yesterday or hundreds of times. That's arrogance. That's when Buster Douglas knocks out Mike Tyson. That's when an expansion team in Houston beats an established NFL team in Dallas. I dare not. Look at the people here, several thousand. I'm taking over an hour. That's several thousand hours of time. Where would my integrity be if I came here unprepared to make something, a presentation that could make a difference in your life? There is no way. You got to prepare for it, ladies and gentlemen. When stress does hit you, how many of you will admit that after 9/11, maybe you had a little stress? Can I see your hands, please? All right. Let me tell you something, folks. If you take the word stressed and spell it backwards, it's desserts. When you respond to life instead of react to it, react is negative. You get sick, go to the doctor, she gives you a prescription, says, see me tomorrow. You walk in the next day, she said, uh-oh, it's not working. We have to change their prescription. You get a little nervous. But if she smiled and said, hey, it's working. And so she's just responded, and you feel better because now you see some real hope in order to get ahead in life. But I don't care how optimistic you are, and incidentally, for what it's worth, I am an optimist. I'd take my last $2 and buy a money belt with it. I mean, that's the way I'm put together. I'd go after Moby Dick in a rowboat and take the tartar sauce with me. Your optimism is an important fact of life. But I don't care what you do. You have a good marriage, a good job, your health is good, you're just really full of vim and vigor and so forth. And then along comes your own 9/11. There's that little bit on stressed. Spell it the other way, it is desserts. Now, let me tell you something, folks. Life does come along, and here's the best representation of life that I've ever seen. This little guy grinning so big, I have never in all of my lifetime seen anybody start here and go there. There are ups and downs all through life. A friend of mine's writing a book, How to Climb a Smooth Mountain. Or you can't climb a smooth mountain. No, life has its ups and downs. But so what do? Stress, the result, fouls up your immune system. It disturbs your sleep patterns. It affects your weight, your productivity, steals your energy. And stress costs our society $200+ billion a year. Now, let me tell you how you deal with it. Well, first of all, understand you don't drown by falling in the water. You only drown if you stay there. You don't fail by getting knocked down. You only fail if you stay there. And if you ever get even a little bit discouraged, just remember the story of Moses. How many of you remember who Moses was in the Bible? Well, you know, at one point, Moses, you knew then that he was a basket case. And that's a biblical fact. But as I understand it, he turned out pretty good. As a matter of fact, he turned out to be better than good. Now, to do all of these things, it's not just having a positive thinking, it's positive thinking. Now, what is positive thinking? It's positive thinking with a game plan. That's what it is. You got to have a plan. But if I've already repeated this, I already said it, let me repeat it. Nothing can stop the man with the right mental attitude from achieving his goal. Nothing on earth can help the man with the wrong mental attitude. And we have a lot of people who have an advanced case of stinking thinking, and we got to do something about that. How do you avoid that stress? You do everything with integrity. Let me tell you something, folks. Integrity is so critically important, because with integrity, you do the right thing. That means no guilt. When you have integrity, you have nothing to fear because you have nothing to hide. Now think about it for a moment. With nothing to fear and nothing to hide, doesn't that within itself reduce stress? And isn't that a step towards success in your family and in your business as well? It all goes together. With integrity, it's significant, all of the things you can do so much more effectively. And you need to remember that Emerson said that if you would lift me up, you must be on higher ground. You want to move up the step of the ladder, then you need to be an example that other people want to emulate. He said, what lies behind you and what lies before you are tiny matters compared to what lies within you. How do you reduce stress? Accept that as a fact. How do you reduce stress? Learn to laugh. Learn to laugh out loud. And I got to tell you right now, if you hear something that's really funny and don't, you suppress the laughter reverses itself, comes back inside, and spreads your hips. I'm glad you heard that. Okay. My favorite joke is about a little Johnny. Little Johnny was a pistol. He was a second grader. One day in school, he was a second grader, and the teacher told him on Friday night, class, if any of you have a good weekend, tell us about it on Monday. Well, on Monday morning, little Johnny was seated there at his little desk, which was anchored, but little Johnny wasn't. That kid was all over the place right there in his own desk. Teacher said, Johnny looked like he had a good weekend. Yes, ma'am, sure did. What'd you do, Johnny? Me and my daddy went fishing. We caught 75 catfish. They all weighed 75 pounds. Now, Johnny, son, you know that's just not true. Oh, yes, ma'am, it is. My dad is a great fisherman. I'm even better than he is. We caught 75 catfish. They all weighed 75 pounds. Now, Johnny, if I were to tell you that on the way to school this morning, about 3 blocks from here, a big old 10-foot tall, 900-pound grizzly bear reared up right in front of me, was about to grab me and eat me up, when out of nowhere comes a little old 8-pound yellow dog. He jumps up, he grabs that grizzly bear by the nose, he throws him down, bounces him back and forth, breaks his neck, kills him dead. Johnny, if I were to tell you that, would you believe it? He said, oh, yes, ma'am. As a matter of fact, that's my dog. Question. How many of you now feel less stressed than you did since I started talking? May I see your hands, please? All right. Now, think with me. Suppose you and I were to get together every morning on your way to work in Automobile University, and you heard similar, encouraging, entertaining information. You think you'd feel better when you got to the job? And suppose on your way home, we had another presentation containing information that's valuable at home. How many of you think you would have a better reception at home and perform better, whether you're husband, wife, single or married or whatever? What happens in one of your locations impacts greatly what happens in other locations. It really does go. Right after 9/11, people said to me, well, Zig, did that change your travel schedule? And I said, well, of course not. I don't drive my car looking over my shoulder. I'm not going to run my life. I don't drive my car looking in the rearview mirror. I'm not going to run my life looking over my shoulder. Besides, I'm a Christian. My Bible tells me in Psalms 139:16 that my death date was determined before I was born, and that God had orchestrated every step of those months I spent in my mother. Now, what I'm getting at is something very simple. Since my death date was already determined before I was born, that tells me there's not a terrorist in the world who can lay his hands on me unless it's in God's time and God's will. Now, number two, if it's in God's time and God's will, I am ready to go. Why should I be stressed about receiving the greatest promotion any human being will ever receive from planet Earth? Now, please understand, I know there are people in this audience who do not share my beliefs. There are some people here who don't have any faith of any kind. There are some who are just kind of casual about it. There are two things I can tell you with absolute certainty. You know, the Supreme Court has ruled that in certain cases you cannot even display the 10 Commandments. But I'm going to tell you that if those Supreme Court justices did not obey the 10 Commandments, they would be defrocked and jailed. You see, the reality is we need a governing authority. Our founding fathers understood that. They also understood that God's possibles were infinitely greater than man's permissibles. If those Supreme Court justices did not obey the 10 Commandments, you just killed somebody on the job, whether it's at home or at home. Your family is destroyed, your career is destroyed. The Bible says work as unto the Lord. That means give it your best shot every day. You work that way and your security is ensured on that particular job unless circumstances beyond anybody's control take place. Little things make such a big difference, ladies and gentlemen, and faith is certainly one of those things that makes a huge, huge difference in life. I got to tell you, folks, I don't know anybody who has as much fun as I do. People say, well, you say that really did not impact your life. It didn't change your schedule. Absolutely not. Every once in a while, somebody will say to me, Zig, I heard you had retired. I said, man, you weren't listening. I said I was refired. I'm not going to ease up, let up, shut up, or give up until I'm taken up. As a matter of fact, I'm just getting warmed up. Ladies and gentlemen, I really do believe that my future is still in front of me. As a matter of fact, we've just experienced a significant breakthrough starting in September at Southern Nazarene University in Oklahoma City. They will be teaching to their students, their freshman class, things I've been teaching in corporate America for over 30 years. They want to jumpstart the move from academia into the real world. They want to hear things like you've been hearing this morning. Am I thinking about giving up? Ladies and gentlemen. As a matter of fact, this picture gives a long explanation of why that is true. That's me sitting right there. That's my desk in front of me. 5 stacks of letters with over 5,000 unsolicited letters from all over the world about changed lives, marriages healed, kids coming off of drugs, moving up the ladder, senior citizen going back to college and getting their education there at age 60 or even 70 years old. I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm having more fun than I've ever had. My enthusiasm, my health has been so good. It's absolutely amazing. And I want to conclude simply by saying this. When you go, and incidentally, the things I've been talking about, many of them are in my brand new book, Better Than Good, which is now on the bestseller list as well, or was about a month ago. Now, when I start talking about these things, when I get through with this, I want to remind you one last time, when you get to the goal line of life and look into the end zone and see your children, your grandchildren, and people your life has impacted, you will clearly understand that for you, God's possibles are infinitely greater than man's permissibles, and you will shout with joy. Life's journey is not to arrive at the grave safely in a well-preserved body, but rather to skid in sideways, totally worn out, shouting, "Holy cow, what a ride!" Thank you so much. Thank you. God bless you.
Mr. Zig Ziglar, come on, give him a big hand.
Great job.